morning. I'm Jeff Kiernan. I'm the Regional Public Affairs Manager for the League of California Cities. And I cover this area, the South Bay, as well as the West Side and the Las Virgenes, Malibu cities. The League, our mission really is to help educate and advocate on behalf of cities in Sacramento and DC. So about 3 years ago, we have this goal of really trying to meet with our elected officials in the districts in which they serve, not always going to their offices in Sacramento. So I came together with the South Bay Association of Chambers of Commerce, the SBACC, represented today by Mr. Dan Hoffman over here. He's one of our co-hosts. And of course then the South Bay Council of Cities, Council of Governments as well, with Jackie Bacharach as Executive Director, and Jim Osborne, who I've lost, there he is the chair this year. Thank you very much for helping to put this event together. We're 3 years running, and we've only been growing each year. And of course, I want to thank Torrance and actually bring up Mayor Fury now to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and get us started.
Place your right hand over your heart and repeat. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of my colleagues on the Torrance City Council, I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend the third annual South Bay Legislative Meet and Greet. I want to thank the South Bay Association of Chambers of Commerce, the South Bay Cities Council of Governments, and the Los Angeles County Division of the League of California Cities for coordinating today's event. I don't believe I have to tell anyone in this room that things happening in Washington, D.C., even as we sit here today, give concern to many of our residents and those of us in government in California. This is day 5 of the new administration, and I was reminded just yesterday by the CEO of the U.S. Conference of Mayors of the appropriate words of Bette Davis in the 1950 movie All About Eve, and I think they're quite appropriate today. And she said, "Fasten your seatbelts, it's going to be a long and bumpy ride." I think we're looking for interesting things to occur in the short term and the long term, and that's why it's so important to be here today with our representatives in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. In any event, as key players in the community, we must strive every day to advance our region. We must focus on improving our transportation systems, our infrastructure, our residents' quality of life and access to services, while protecting the environment and strengthening economic development, just to name a few things. Our personal viewpoints and priorities may differ from time to time. However, as leaders and key stakeholders, we must always remember that it is our civic duty to be inclusive, to listen, and to advocate as best we can for all of our constituents and the region at large. As mayor of Torrance, where we are always searching for innovative ways to advance and better serve our community, I know this process takes plenty of patience and plenty of commitment. So today, it's great to see all of you here, eager to learn more about each other and the resources available to help push your efforts, our efforts, and our goals across the next milestone. As American scholar Warren Bennett said, leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. Good leaders are trailblazers, making a path for others to follow. Great leaders, however, inspire their people to reach higher, dream bigger, and achieve more. Perhaps the most important leadership skill we can develop is the ability to provide inspiration to our communities. If we inspire folks to reach for the stars, they just might bring us back to the moon. Be assured, that the city of Torrance will continue to do its part in advancing our region. And I thank you all for doing your part.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, a little housekeeping for us all. We have 5, hopefully, wonderful legislators here today. We're still waiting on Congressmember Ted Lieu, but we have Congresswoman Maxine Waters here today with us, who will be up in just a moment. State Senator Stephen Bradford, Assembly Members Almira Succi and Mike Gibson. We've each given them about 6 minutes to kind of talk about what they have in store for us legislatively this year, what their priorities are. And then following those opening remarks, once we get all of them through their opening statements, we're going to be doing a lot of question and answer from the audience. On your tables are 3x5 cards, and we'd love it if you would fill out your questions there. Sign your name if you're willing, and then hold them up, and we have some volunteers who are going to come around and collect them, and then we'll hopefully get to as many of them as we can. We do the cards because oftentimes a lot of the questions tend to be very similar, so I'm going to try to bunch them together and package them together and try to get as many questions in as we can. So before I get started, I do want to also let our speakers know, get a sense of the city elected officials who are also in the room today. And I know city officials do always like to be recognized, but not even the Kanabe one clap would be sufficient today, since I think we have more than 30 city elected officials just here in this room. So I wanted to try to at least identify you by city. Let's start with our where we are today, and the Torrance city elected officials. Could you please raise your hands? Thank you, thank you. I think that's about all of you. I think we have a few, 1 or 2 from Lawndale as well in the house. Here we are. And Lamita. Who would not get Lamita? Hey, there's Mark, of course. Hermosa Beach. I saw Hanny somewhere. Hanny. Do we have Manhattan Beach in the house? I don't think so today. Not yet, at least. Rancho Palos Verdes. Palos Verdes Estates. Hey. Rolling Hills Estates. Over here. Did I miss any city? It's awful for me if I missed the city. There we go. I did a good job. All right. So we're going to follow the traditional rules of seniority here, beginning with Congresswoman Maxine Waters. So let's get started. Political stature. Congresswoman Waters was elected in November to her 14th term in the U.S. House of Representatives. She represents the 43rd Congressional District, which includes the communities of Westchester, Playa del Rey, Watts, the Harbor Gateway, El Camino Village, and at least pieces of Torrance, Gardena, Hawthorne, Inglewood, Lawndale, and Lamita. She is the ranking member of the Financial Services Committee, former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and something I didn't know, she was born in St. Louis, Missouri, but moved to Los Angeles early and received her degree from CSULA before starting her public service career as a teacher and coordinator of the Head Start program. So everyone, please, let's welcome Congresswoman Maxine Waters.
Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? When they talk about the order of introductions and they talk about seniority, I don't know if they're thinking about how long I've been in service or how old I am. And so I'd like them to start with introductions based on your last name, which means Waters. Where would I be in the line of things? All right. How are you doing this morning? Thank you very much. I'm going to try and share with you what I see is happening in Washington, D.C. I just want you to know I woke up this morning introduced to the fact that we're about to have a trade war with Mexico, with each side saying that they're going to have 20% tariffs on each other, and I don't know where that's going to go. Prior to this, in the last few days, we've had great discussions about some very important things. The size of the crowd at the inauguration, and whether or not 3 to 5 million, I believe it is, actually voted improperly, and that there's been fraud in the election. So having said that, it gives you an idea, if you have not been paying attention, to the kind of uncertainty that is going on in Washington, D.C. With that, let me share with you some prepared remarks. I'd like to begin by thanking Jeffrey Kernan, Los Angeles County Division of the League of California Cities, the South Bay Association of Chambers of Commerce, and the South Bay Cities Council of Governments for inviting me here to speak today. I also want to thank all of our elected officials who are in attendance here today, and you just heard them all announce. I know there is a great deal of interest and uncertainty about the state of affairs in Washington, D.C., and how this new administration is being received on Capitol Hill. President Trump has already taken several actions that will have substantial repercussions on immigration, the environment, and the Affordable Care Act. Sadly, while many of us in Congress on both sides of the aisle are unsure as to how the president intends to unilaterally implement all of his executive orders and memorandum, a lot of attention has been wasted, as I said, on discussing the size of the audience at inauguration and President Trump's claim that 3 to 5 million people voted illegally. Today, however, I'm here to try and talk about actual problems that are facing our country. As I'm sure you know, the number one Republican agenda item is to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, or what is commonly known as Obamacare. Yet, there is still a complete lack of agreement between the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress about whether repeal and replacement will occur at the same time and what their alternative will be. My friends on the opposite side of the aisle control the House, the Senate, and the White House. The problem is that they're so focused on undoing the past 8 years that there's not yet a plan for the next 4 years. Repealing Obamacare without a replacement could have severe impacts on millions of Americans, including people right here in the South Bay who may go without such things as coverage for pre-existing conditions, expanded Medicaid for low-income adults, or subsidies for affordable health care that makes insurance more affordable for middle-class families. Approximately 20 million Americans gained access to quality health insurance as a result of Obamacare. This includes more than 105,000 people in my congressional district alone. While I was unable to determine the exact number for the South Bay cities, I can tell you that 20,590 people in my district are enrolled in Covered California as of June 26, of whom 18,422 receive subsidies. In addition, 87,000 people in my district are benefiting from the expansion of Medicaid. All of these people could lose their access to health care if Obamacare is repealed. As a ranking member of the House Committee on Financial Services, I'm responsible for leading Democratic oversight of Wall Street and the financial services industry, as well as all of the federal agencies that regulate their activities. These agencies include the Treasury Department, the Federal Reserve, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, known as HUD, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You're going to hear a lot about the CFPB. Our committee is responsible for protecting consumers and financial markets from the type of activities that led to the Great Recession leading up to 2008. Wall Street gambled with the economy by originating predatory subprime mortgages and selling them to unsuspecting homeowners so that they could turn around and sell these same mortgages to unsuspecting investors. And when this house of cards came crashing down, the American public was left holding the bill to the tune of $700 billion in bailout. To clean up the mess, one of the first things we did was to pass the Dodd-Frank law to make sure that Wall Street could never again put the American economy or the American taxpayer at risk like that again. Because of Dodd-Frank, banks can no longer gamble with the money of their customers, and that's the kind of trading activities that you hear a lot about. And when you heard about what happened in London, when Chase Manhattan took a big gamble a few years ago with the kind of bets where they could use depositor money to do this kind of trading. That's what I'm referring to when I talk about no longer being able to gamble with the money of their customers. Mortgages have to be safe, sound, and with an ability to repay. And if a bank does not get itself in trouble, or does rather get itself in trouble, the government can wind it down without it posing a risk to the economy or to taxpayers. This is very complicated and it's detailed. We have something called living wills, and these living wills basically dictate what we do to basically wind down a financial institution that pose a risk to our entire economy. And so at some point in time, I'd love to have the opportunity to talk about how this all works. A centerpiece of this Dodd-Frank Reform Act is the CFPB that I told you you'd hear a lot about. That's the Consumer Financial Protection Agency, or Bureau, the first federal agency exclusively dedicated to protecting consumers. I'm proud to say in just 5 years, the CFPB has returned $12 billion to 29 million consumers, made the mortgage market safer for consumers and lenders, and pushed for rules that rein in abuses by student loan servicers, payday lenders, and debt collectors. And so, you're going to hear a lot about the CFPB. It is headed by a man named Cordray. Mr. Cordray has done a fantastic job. Prior to the creation of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which again is the centerpiece of the Dodd-Frank reform, our agencies, many of those that I just told you about, had the responsibility not only for safety and security of our financial institutions and all of that, but they really had the responsibility for consumer protection, but they forgot all about that, and they didn't deal with that. And that's why when we took a look at what had happened with this meltdown in 2008, we saw that the consumers had no protection. And when I refer to payday lenders and some of the schools or the private post-secondary educational organizations such as Corinthian, you've heard about a lot of these, DeVry, et cetera, and you've heard about the problems that we've had with these institutions where people sign on the dotted line and they take out these student loans and they're promised a career and that they're going to get jobs. And guess what? Nothing happens. They're stuck with those loans. They have to pay them back, and if they don't, they lose the ability to participate in a lot of other things in our government. That too is, detailed and very complicated, and sometimes we need to have a discussion about private post-secondary schools, a lot of them which are in the South Bay area, and whether or not your government dollars are really funding real careers and education opportunities, or whether or not there's a big ripoff going on here. My committee also covers affordable housing programs, which are so critical to many of our cities. We all know that there's a rental housing crisis, but many areas in my district are struggling with homelessness, high housing costs, and extremely low vacancy rates. I'm working on solutions including investing in creating new affordable housing through the National Housing Trust Fund, expanding Section 8, and robustly funding public housing. I'm very concerned about many of the nominees whose names have surfaced that are being recommended by President Trump for critical positions in our government, his cabinet. But since I have watched all of them, and I have a lot to say about each of them. I've just mentioned to you something about housing, and that comes under HUD. And I'm very concerned about Dr. Ben Carson, the potential HUD secretary, and actions he might take to roll back important housing programs. I'm prepared to hold the administration accountable to make sure affordable housing is expanded and that homelessness and housing instability becomes a thing of the past. I remain steadfastly committed to a range of other issues that affect our community. Last Congress, I introduced 33 pieces of legislation that propose policy changes that help protect students, veterans, and consumers. This legislation includes bills to address Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, as well as legislation I've authored to hold predatory for-profit colleges accountable for fraudulent activities such as name of the bills, Students Before Profits Act and the Class Act. I've also authored legislation to address disparities in the criminal justice system, legislation providing mental health, higher education, and resource support for veterans, namely the Veteran Mental Health Defense Act, the Ensuring Quality Education for Veterans Act, and the Upgrade Veterans Service Facilities Act. We must remain focused on fighting for our priorities, and I'm flying back to Washington on Monday to do just that. Now, let me just say that I'm told that we will have an opportunity to answer questions about anything that you would like to hear about that we can help you with, particularly about what is going on in Washington now, about any of the nominees and their backgrounds. I know an awful lot about them. I've studied a lot about them. I know who they are. I know their experience or lack of. In addition to that, I know I only have 6 minutes, but I have to say this. I have to conclude this. We have to be concerned not only about what is happening on our border with this potential trade war, but we'd better be concerned about what is happening with this new relationship with Russia. We're talking about Putin, who all of a sudden is emerging as a great friend of our new president. But this is a man that I want you to know we already have some sanctions on because of a number of activities that he's been involved in. He's no friend to the United States of America. And don't forget, he was just involved in supporting what is going on with President Assad in Syria. And they blanket bombed Aleppo, where they killed thousands of innocent civilians, children, women, men, families. And so we've got to be concerned about this relationship. We have, on the Senate side, an investigation that's going on about the hacking into the Democratic National Committee and the DCCC, where I was hacked and everybody else was hacked, had to change all of our telephone numbers, etc. And we must know that any foreign entity, any country, any nation that dares to undermine our elections process is no friend of ours. And so, as we look at the sanctions that already this president is talking about lifting, don't forget, on the Senate side, they're talking about imposing more sanctions because they understand that unless we're tough on Russia, they will continue to be about expansion. And don't forget, they are the ones who have obtained, well, they have gone into they've taken over Crimea. And that is what sets them apart from us in terms of NATO and the ability to expand into other countries. This man is focused on reuniting the Soviet Union. That's what it's all about. So I want us to keep that in mind. And if you focus on nothing else, if you agree with everything else that this new president will do, think about the safety and security of this nation. And you ask yourself whether or not you think Putin or Russia is our friend. I'll be available for any questions that you may have for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And now I'd like to, I think you've had a chance to arrive and you've probably had a chance to catch your breath. Congressmember Ted Lieu has joined us. He was first elected to the 33rd Congressional District in 2014. and he's serving his second term in Congress. His district stretches from the Palos Verdes Peninsula all the way along the coast up to Agoura Hills, and then inland as far as even Hancock Park, neighborhood of Los Angeles. Congressman Liu is a former state senator, state assembly member, and member of the Torrance City Council. The congressman serves on the House Judiciary Committee and on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and was also selected as an assistant whip for the Democratic caucus this year. And if that isn't enough, he is a former active duty officer in the U.S. Air Force and currently serves as a colonel in the reserves. So let's please bring up Congressman Ted Liu.
Good morning. I'm so honored to be here today, and let me first thank the Torrance City Council and their staff for the great job that they do. The cool thing about a member of Congress is you don't actually have to live in your district. So I could live in Hawaii and represent the 33rd Congressional District, but I choose to live in Torrance because it's an awesome city. I love the Class 1 rated fire department, your awesome police department, so thank you for making my hometown so great. I want to thank the other elected officials here for all that you do, as well as the members of their chambers of commerce. I thought I'd just talk about one issue today because I think it's so important, and it's going to be about cybersecurity. But before I do that, I do want to give a shout out to my colleague, Maxine Waters. As you know, she has been fighting the good fight on the Financial Services Committee. Had they listened to her, we would not have had the financial meltdown. Afterwards, they did listen to her, and she helped put in some amazing common sense regulations and laws. As a result, our stock market is now up 3 times since then. So let's give her a great big round of applause. So in terms of cybersecurity, I'm going to talk about how it affects you at the governmental level, and then how it affects you on your personal level. So I'll just start with our latest cyber attack, the Russian cyber attack and influence campaign. I encourage you to read the unclassified intelligence report. If you just Google unclassified intelligence report, it's the first document that pops up. You can read it. The conclusions in that report are many. Some of them include that Russia launched a massive cyber attack and influence campaign ordered by Vladimir Putin. It was launched with the goals of undermining faith in the U.S. democratic system, to denigrate Secretary Clinton, and to help Trump's election chances. It also shows that 20 state electoral boards got hacked, and a number of other conclusions. I have read the classified version of that report. I've sat through classified briefings, and what I will say is there is clear and convincing evidence to support the conclusions in the unclassified report. So I highly encourage you to read that. But that was just the last cyber attack. We've had multiple attacks before then. We have had attacks from China, from North Korea, from a range of other countries. Last term, I was on the Oversight Committee. We held hearings on the massive cyber attacks on our Office of Personnel Management. There were 2 attacks. One released millions of federal employees' personal data, Social Security numbers and others, onto the internet. And then a second one was from a foreign entity that stole over 20 million security clearance records. They have been called the crown jewels of American national intelligence. These are what's known as SF-86 forms. I know because I had to fill one out for my security clearance. And it is extremely intrusive and sensitive. It's every bad thing you've ever done, your family, everywhere you've ever traveled, any bad thing about you. And now 20 million of these records are in the hands of a foreign government. Think about the potential for blackmail, right, of U.S. federal employees. So this was a significant blow to our national security, and it wasn't because of a kinetic rocket attack or ground troops. It was a cyber attack. And when we did hearings on it, it was very clear that the Office of Personnel Management have very weak cybersecurity controls. For 7 years, they ignored IG warnings that said, your cybersecurity controls are really weak. You need to do something about it. And the last IG warning was so remarkable because it actually said, we think you should shut down some of your systems because it's so weak. And they didn't do that. And that's why I was the first legislator to call for the resignation of the OPM director. She eventually did resign. They put a new person who was much better. But we also realized it wasn't just an issue of leadership. There were structural problems, right? Why is our human resources agency, that's what Office of Personnel Management is, protecting the crown jewels of American national intelligence. That's really stupid. It'd be like the Department of Agriculture protecting our nuclear launch codes, right? You just wouldn't do that. So I worked with Republican Congressman Steve Russell out of Oklahoma. We wrote a letter to administration, we drafted legislation, and we said, you need to move this really sensitive database out of a human resources agency into the Department of Defense. White House did a big study, and then they came up and they agreed with us. So they are now shifting this database to U.S. Cyber Command for protection, and hopefully this doesn't happen again. But something else we realized is there was just a lack of resources. So we've got systems in federal government that are still running on languages such as COBOL, which 2 decades ago people said were obsolete. So you have these systems that were just not designed, right, for 21st century cyber attacks. So you now move from the federal government to state and local governments. I would bet most of your systems can be hacked. And there's a saying, right, in cybersecurity that there's only 2 kinds of entities, those that have been hacked and know it, and those that have been hacked and don't know it. So you have these different vulnerabilities, and one of the attacks that now are occurring are attacks known as ransomware. So what will happen is hackers will go, for example, to a hospital, such as Hollywood Presbyterian in Southern California, and lock up all the patient's files. And then they say, all right, you pay us some amount of money and we'll unlock it, or you don't pay us any money and we won't unlock it. So then the hospital is in the situation going, do we put our patients' safety at risk? Do we have surgeries where the doctors can't access these files? Or do we make the payment to these hackers? Well, this hospital chose to make the payment to these hackers. Now we're seeing these attacks on police departments. We're seeing these attacks on law firms, on a range of different entities, now where they will lock up your files and then demand a payment. We've written a letter to the FBI asking for additional information on what they believe is the scope of ransomware and ways to solve it. So if I were you, I would look into how your cybersecurity systems are being protected, what weak points there may be. This also occurs right in the private sector. It's not just a governmental problem. You've had massive attacks at Anthem Blue Cross, Target, Home Depot, the list goes on. And it's really hard to stop at some level if you not only don't upgrade your systems, but if you don't train your employees, right? You just need one employee to make a mistake, click on a link on their email that they shouldn't have, and then wham, malware infected the system. In the Air Force Reserves where I serve on duty, we've got to do mass amounts of training on cybersecurity. We've got special units who just try to trick us into making mistakes and they tell us what happened. So U.S. military is somewhat better. We all went to 2-factor authentication, which I encourage you to do. And what that means is before you or your employee can use your computer system, you need a second form of physical or some other identification before you can log into your computer. So for example, now in the military, before I can even use my word processor, I have to have this separate physical ID card that I stick into this system. And it was really annoying when they first implemented this well over a decade ago, because you forget that card, you are useless for the entire day. Or you lost it, well, then you're useless for the entire week. But then people started adjusting. And once that happened, it makes it just an order of magnitude harder for someone to hack the system, because even if they had your password and your username, they still can't get in because they need a separate physical thing that's attached to you. And then let me now conclude on how this affects you personally. Many of you probably also work from home or work from your mobile device, which is connected to your work server or desktop. And this little thing here, right, that I have, it is not protected. Our house CIO office does a huge amount of resources and money to protect our desktop and servers, but then they connect this thing, right, to our servers, and it is so easily hackable. And if it's hacked, then they become me. They enter this system. They can do all sorts of nefarious things. It freaked us out so much that I worked with Republican Will Hurd, a member of Congress. We're 2 of 4 people that have computer science degrees in Congress. And we wrote a letter to all members of Congress as well as their staff saying, we're going to give you some best practice tips on how to protect this device. So I'm going to give you two of those. I would never, if I were you, log on to public Wi-Fi. And the reason is it's really hard for you to know if you're on the correct one. So let's say you were at Starbucks. Would you know if the correct Wi-Fi was Starbucks or Starbucks 1 or Starbucks _1? And if you log on to one of those and it turns out that it's the wrong one because it's a hacker sitting 20 feet away from you, then within seconds, that hacker has all your information and you're going to be a victim of identity theft or worse. Second thing I would do is some of you have phones that automatically log on to Wi-Fi, which means you can walk by a Starbucks. Your phone will log on, you lose information, you won't even know it. So I would disable that feature on your cell phone. And then I would also go to encryption, which you can download all these different apps. WhatsApp is one of them on your phone. Another is called Signal. A third one's called Telephone. And when you communicate with someone else, then your communications are encrypted. It is annoying because you got to get the other person to also use that same application. But more and more people are doing it. That's how I communicate with my staff. And then you might just want to do what I did when I communicated to my staff a few months ago. I said, given our lack of protections in cybersecurity, you are to assume everything you do on your personal phone or computer can't end up on the front pages of the Washington Post the next day. And if you're okay with that, go ahead and do it. So with that, thanks so much for having me here. Hopefully I scared some of you and look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Congressman. I'm going to go throw my phone in the water. Now, as we make this switch from our federal elected officials to our state elected officials, I need to correct an error of omission, which I forgot to mention, and to thank the Metropolitan Water District for providing our breakfast this morning. So please, let's give a big round of applause for the Metropolitan Water District and Charles Gale for doing that for us today. Now, I'd like to, as we switch over to our state elected officials, I want to bring up State Senator Stephen Bradford. He was just elected to his first term representing the 35th State Senate District and is representing the communities of Carson, Gardena, the Harbor Gateway, Hawthorne, Inglewood, Lawndale, Rancho Palos Verdes, Wilmington, and Torrance, just to name a few. Senator Bradford serves in Sacramento on the Appropriations Committee, the Energy, Utilities, and Communications Committee, the Government Organization Committee, and the Labor and Industrial Relations Committee. The senator is a South Bay native. He grew up here in Gardena, just across the border, and began his public service in local government, having served for 12 years on the Gardena City Council, including as its mayor. After City Council, the senator also served 9 years in the Assembly before making the leap to the Senate. Is that not right? All right, let's please welcome Senator Stephen Bradford.
I wish I had served 9 years in the Assembly. Good morning, or good afternoon. It's truly an honor to be here and participate in this legislative discussion. And as you've heard from both our congresspeople, both Congressman Lieu and Congresswoman Walters, the challenges before us are great. I want to thank the League for putting this meet and greet together and this briefing together. All the local elected officials, as stated in my introduction, I got my start in local government with the city of Gardena at a time when we were in a crisis. 20 years ago, when I was elected to Gardena City Council, we were on the brink of bankruptcy. We had absolutely no money in the bank. We owed $27 million to Sumitomo Bank. Our employees hadn't had raises in over 7 years, and it was not a pretty sight. And 12 years later, we'd eliminated that debt. We'd given our employees 3 raises in that time period, put $8.5 million in the bank, and enhanced city services without laying off a single employee, without raising taxes or cutting any programs. So we decided we needed to work harder and work smarter. And I say that because many times in government, people think you can run government in the same way that you run a business, and that's not the case. But there are clearly efficiencies of business that we can incorporate in government. And that's what we did in Gardena. That's what we're trying to do in the state of California. And hopefully that's what we're going to do on the federal level. But as both our Congress members clearly stated, the challenges for California and this nation are great right now. And what we're working on in the legislature first is to be a firewall and be the litmus test for the rest of the nation to show that we can continue to provide health care for all families who need it, that we can improve our infrastructure because that is truly a priority. We can grow our economy, and we can deal with this issue of homelessness that is real, not only throughout the 35th Senate District, but throughout the state of California. And I think if this election taught us one thing over the last, sound like it was 2 years, felt like it was 2 years ago, but over the last 6 months or so, was that it was the difference between importance and priority. I think every issue that we heard during the campaign was important, but clearly what's important to me might not be a priority to our next door neighbors. So I think we need to start approaching government on what's those priorities and what are the main priorities. And I think homelessness needs to be at the top of that list as a priority. How do we put people in homes? And I think the Congresswoman spoke to the fact of what she's trying to do and providing money for building more affordable homes. I'm working right now with a piece of legislation with the County of Los Angeles. They're wanting to create regional zones within the county where it's permissive as to new development that comes in, that a portion of that is set aside for affordable market rate rental properties, not a rent-controlled zone or any of that. That's not what we're seeing. We're trying to get developers to agree, if we create these zones, that if you build 100 units, you'll make 5 that are not necessarily at market rate. And that's critical because, again, until we start providing affordable homes and housing for people, whether it's through purchase or rental, we're going to continue to see the growth of the individuals that we walk by every day, we drive by every day. You cannot get on a freeway ramp, and if you look around in the shrubbery, there's a tent, there's a pop-up somewhere, there's a bicycle somewhere, there's a lean-to somewhere where someone's living there. And many times, someone's living there with children. And we found out in California the number of kids that go to school on a daily basis that are homeless. And it would astound you at the number of kids who go to school, not only homeless, but hungry. And a piece of legislation I'm working on right now is also to not penalize a parent who receives benefits, and she has 2 children, one who's getting child support from that father, the other one that may not be. We're right now penalizing parents and saying, okay, you cannot participate in a lunch program because your income exceeds whatever that poverty level is because that one child is receiving child support from a parent. That makes absolutely no sense. So our challenges are great, but I'm excited about the opportunity. And some of the things that we're working on, as you heard the governor's state address on Monday, on Tuesday, is really water. And how do we get water from Northern California down to Southern California? It's often stated that whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting over. Well, we're in a real fight throughout California on water, and it's one of the real issues. And we're going to have to kind of like take down our biases and understand there's a lot of technology that's out there, desalinization, and a lot of folks have challenges with desalinization. But I've been around the world. I've been to Israel. It works. And once we decide to embrace it, we can do all those environmental safeguards that everyone's concerned about to make sure that we have potable and drinkable water through desalinization. It's a lot of techniques out there that we're looking at through the legislature. Also, criminal justice reform. Congresswoman Waters spoke to that. It's an issue that is burdening the state and it's burdening this nation. We incarcerate more people than any other free country in the world, and something's wrong with that. And the real challenge is when many of these folks are released after serving their time, they can't find a job. And when we have these massive fires throughout California, many of the first line, along with the trained fire professionals that come through CAL FIRE and surrounding agencies, many of those guys on the front line and women are inmates. But once they're released, they can't get hired by a fire department. Something's wrong with that. Even individuals who are incarcerated and they learn a trade, cosmetology, many of them cannot come out and get a license in cosmetology afterwards. So those are some of the reforms that we're going to work on and as a legislature. I see my time has expired. I'm going to adhere to the timekeeper, and I'll welcome any questions and answers once that time approaches. Thank you.
I think our timekeeper has the hardest job this morning, but moving along, I want to now bring up Assemblymember Mike Gibson. He was first elected to the Assembly in 2014. He represents the 64th District, which includes Torrance again, Carson, Gardena, Wilmington, the Harbor Gateway areas. His committees include aging and long-term care, business and professions, governmental organization, revenue and taxation, and insurance. In addition to being a member of the Carson City Council for 9 years, Mr. Gibson has worked on the staff of several other elected officials, including as Chief of Staff to Board of Equalization Chair Jerome Horton. Before finding his calling in government, he was also a police officer for the Maywood Police Department. Let's please welcome Assemblymember Mike Gordon.
Thank you very much. Good morning to each and every one of you. I want to thank the South Bay Association of Chambers of Commerce for allowing us to be here. Certainly the mayor, all the elected officials in the room, our Congresswoman Maxine Waters and Ted Lieu, and to all my other state colleagues here. It's great to be here. I'm excited as you continue to invite me here to just give a briefing, to give an update on what's going on. I want to also thank Jeff and also the League of Cities. I remember home, and I want to underscore that. I remember what it means to be a local elected official. And I shall never forget to making sure that local elected officials have a voice in Sacramento, because sometimes people get amnesia when they go to Sacramento. Many of my colleagues have never served in government before. This is their first elected position. And so they don't know what it means to making sure that we bring home the bacon, making sure that we balance the budget, making sure that there's money for our recreation park programs, infrastructure, our roads, making sure that individuals are taken care of, working on collective bargaining agreements and things of that nature. And so I'm there to remind them every step of the way. And let me also say this, that every chance I get, I always talk about what the state did when they took away redevelopment money. That was devastating, because for someone who came from local government and worked on the city council for almost 9 years, and they just ripped that away from us, I understand that cities are still struggling and really need those resources. And so every chance I get, I'm going to talk about that, Mark, because I understand the importance of that, Pat. I understand the importance of making sure that we can have monies in our own reserve to take care of blighted areas and also create opportunities for not only new entrepreneurship, but also new businesses that's going to hire locally in our particular community. So I just wanted to say that just very briefly. I'm so happy to, thank you. I'm happy that the speaker found, again, favor on me to appoint me as the chair of the Democratic caucus in the State Assembly. We share a great majority of 55 members, so we have a supermajority in the State Assembly. And dealing with all 55 personalities, Al, sometimes it gets difficult. But we find ourselves in this position, and we're very grateful for that. And I'm, again, just happy to be on. The speaker released our new assignments, and many of you, if there's anything that I can do or any bill ideas, please don't hesitate to reach out to me in reference to that. Some of the things that my colleagues have already touched on is some of the things that I'm very concerned about. I think the governor did. I introduced 40 bills in the State Assembly in my first term, and the governor signed 16 of those bills. So I'm very grateful for that. We've hit the ground running. A number of those bills I'm very proud of, one of which I was the co-principal of. I actually brought the idea to the senator because I believe a woman needs to champion this particular bill. What actually started is that a young man who reached out to me on Facebook was just a victim of a rape. I thought it would get quiet. Victim of a rape. And he wanted to actually share information with law enforcement. Law enforcement said there is a 10-year statute of limitation in California. So I went to Senator Connie Leyva, and she carried the bill, and I became the co-principal. Now we removed the statute of limitation off of rape. I'm happy to do that. That was Senate Bill 813, where California no longer have a statute of limitation. So no matter how long it takes, no matter where the individual may be, if we can find you, we can prosecute you, and there's no statute of limitation. Why is that important? Because people cannot bring closure. They can't have decent relationships because of what happened to them. No one wants to be raped. No one wants to be raped. Not a woman, not a man, or a child. And so we put that good, sensible legislation before the legislative body, and the governor signed that bill into law, and I'm happy that he did that. And let me also say this, because it came up, it had nothing to do with Bill Cosby. It had everything to do with the people who have not been able to bring closure, and the statute of limitation was standing in the way of them bringing closure to the hurt and pain that was caused by this individual. And so we're happy to do that particular legislation. In addition to that, we were happy to introduce legislation that individuals who have made a mistake, who have caused themselves to be part of the penal system, the justice system, incarcerated, we're talking about youth, that once they get out and serve their time, that they can apply for state service. If we don't catch them within the first 6 months, they re-offend. And so it was important that individuals who want to apply for state service, state government jobs, have an opportunity and has the same preferential treatment that individuals would have. So we have removed a barrier, so if anyone who have made a mistake, who've paid their debt to society, now have an opportunity to have that erased when it comes down to state employment, so that we make sure that we do our part to reduce the recidivism rate in our particular state of California. Moving forward, some of the bills that I'm so happy to carry, one of them being open carry, dealing with guns. As a former police officer and someone who still owns guns, and I did say that, I still own guns, but I'm a responsible gun owner. But I realize that every time that you listen to the news, there's something going on in my district, and it has to do with gun violence. And so it has nothing to do with the Second Amendment right, because I believe in the Second Amendment. However, there are individuals who possess guns who should not have guns. Understand that. You see it every day, you read about it, you hear it on the radio, you see it on the news. And so when the legislature looked at the open carry law, they left out a loophole. So don't go out and share this with people. But in the unincorporated areas, of the counties in California, you can still carry a gun with unloaded, but you can still carry it on your side. You can strap it. You can still roll up somewhere, but in the unincorporated areas of the county. So if you can imagine someone who knows this law, who just want to, push the envelope to do this, that law enforcement has to obey their rights to carry that weapon. But there's parts of the communities that you should not be able to do that. And so we're carrying that particular piece of legislation as well. Also, another piece of legislation we're carrying is a piece of legislation where individuals who are 5150, who are having mental disabilities, instead of them being transported to a hospital, that the paramedics will have an opportunity to take them immediately to a place where that's set up for those individuals to receive care immediately. And this will prevent individuals for having a breakout or something taking place in the ER that was going to put safety and other individuals in jeopardy. As a former police officer, I've seen that firsthand. And I know that the health personnel have a difficult time with individuals, especially if you have not been registered or booked. My time has expired. So I'm also carrying another 40 pieces of legislation now. And so we certainly invite you for your ideals and things of that nature to help us do the kind of work that we need to do and empower our individuals and our constituents and make sure that people have the representation that we need. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Now, just before I bring up our final speaker for their opening remarks, I want to remind everyone about the 3x5 cards. If you've filled one of those out, hold it up and we'll have some volunteers that'll come by and collect those too. Now, I'd like to bring up our final speaker, Assemblymember Al Mirat-Suchi. He was just recently elected in November to represent the 66th Assembly District, a post he had held for one term previously from 2012 to 2014. His district includes Torrance, Gardena, Hermosa, Manhattan Beaches, Redondo Beach, Lomita, Palos Verdes Estates, the Harbor Gateway, and the Palos Verdes Peninsula. He is also on Appropriations, Natural Resources, Utility and Energy, Veterans Affairs, and the chair of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee. I'd like to now bring up, he's also a former prosecutor with the California Department of Justice and previously had served on the Torrance School Board. Let's please welcome Assemblymember Al Mirat-Suchi.
Well, good morning, everyone. I know that you've had a series of talking heads, and so I'm happy to be the last talking head here. It's great to be back. I recognize a lot of familiar faces. I've been part of this community for over 20 years now. As Jeff indicated, I had the privilege of serving on the Torrance School Board. I also served on the board of a local organization that continues to be very near and dear to my heart, the Southern California Regional Occupational Center, which I'll talk about in a minute. But it's great to be back, and I look forward to working with all of you again. I am focusing, especially in terms of the business community. I know that this event is co-sponsored by the SBAC, and so I'd like to talk about some of the business issues and how we can support our local businesses and help create jobs in the South Bay. 3 initiatives that I'm focusing on. 1 is tech, 2 is aerospace, and 3 is career technical education. First, on the tech front, I was happy to see that flyer on our table. I assume it was on all of the tables, an upcoming program by the South Bay COG to try to attract more tech jobs to the South Bay. Congressman Liu has the privilege of representing Silicon Beach, but I always thought it sure would be nice if we could extend Silicon Beach further down to the South Bay so that we can bring more of the jobs of today and the jobs of the future to the South Bay. I would love Mayor Fury to engage in a conversation with you about how we can perhaps take this opportunity with this prime commercial real estate opening up at 190th and Western, to try to use that as an anchor tenant to attract high tech to the South Bay so that we can build a strong and robust high-tech industry in the South Bay. So that's one thing that I would love to work with SBAC and all the folks in this room to accomplish. 2 is aerospace. I had the privilege of taking a leadership position on aerospace issues in my first term, and I was very happy to have written a law that helped keep SpaceX in the South Bay. I also co-authored a law that helped Northrop Grumman land the biggest aerospace contract in decades. And so I would like to continue to do that work, especially given that the South Bay was really built on the aerospace industry. I think as Councilman Goodhart and many others that came from the aerospace industry know, we need to continue to support all the great innovation and advanced manufacturing jobs that are coming out of the aerospace industry. One of the big parts of supporting the aerospace industry, as I see Lieutenant Colonel Lasser here, is to make sure that we keep the Los Angeles Air Force Base open and operating. The LA Air Force Base is a key part of the South Bay aerospace industry. They have that very symbolic bridge between the Air Force Base and the Aerospace Corporation. And we know that there is globally leading research and development taking place out of that relationship between the military and the aerospace industry. We need to continue to have those jobs supporting the South Bay economy. And last but certainly not least, I want to support and save a great program that Councilwoman Heidi Ashcraft and I have had the opportunity to support for many years, the Southern California Regional Occupation Center. I know that they like to call it South Bay Rock. I know, but the old-timers call it SCROC. And so I love SCROC, and I want to continue to support that program. That program is facing a lot of funding challenges now as a result of the governor's funding changes, how schools are funded. Basically, they lost their direct funding, and so they've been struggling with challenges to stay open. But I think in talking about workforce development, making sure that not all of our kids are going to college, but we want to make sure that we have the kids being educated, learning the skills to fill these real jobs. There's a real skills gap out there, and we need to make sure that our kids are being trained for the jobs of today and the jobs of the future through programs like SCROC. So those are some of my priorities, and I look forward to talking more and working with all of you. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we're going to move on to our questions. I have a large stack of questions here and just a few minutes to do it. We're going to try to get through as many of them as we can. I was trying to read some of them. The one on top that I got before was, and this again for all of our elected officials who've been up here, please feel free to come up, try to use the microphone because I believe this is being recorded for Torrance TV. So justice reform. A lot of recent legislation has resulted in early release and or no jail time for offenders. Many of these offenders are reoffending. Violent crime and property crimes are up. Why is community safety not more of a priority? Anyone want to field that?
I think community safety is very much a priority. I serve on the Public Safety Committee, and I know what our commitment is to that. It's a lot of misinformation about individuals who are being early released. The individuals who are being early released are folks who never committed a violent or a serious crime, so they're not the ones that are reoffending, committing violent and serious crimes. We have a prison overcrowded issue here in California, which is real, but we kind of spin the story on the increased crime rate. The increased crime rate is because people can't find jobs, and that's real. And I spoke to those folks who have been previously incarcerated, and once they're released, they can't find jobs. So if all I know is committing crimes, I'm going to go back to what I know. So we need to do a better job of finding employment opportunities, finding housing opportunities, finding job training opportunities for those serious offenders. But the folks who are on early release are not the folks who are out there doing the robbing and stealing, because most of the folks who were early released were folks who had a drug problem, who were arrested for DUI or something like that, and we just aren't housing those people anymore. So.
The next, we had a couple questions here on housing and housing development. With the constant increase of population coming to California and housing development increasing, how do you accommodate this influx, not only for building the housing, but what is your plan to provide a sustainable supply of water for those new units and those new people?
Again, we're working with the County of Los Angeles to create regional housing zones for, again, new development. It's permissive. It's not a mandatory set aside, but the county has seen fit, looking at the growing homeless population, to create these zones to allow, again, a number of units to be set aside for affordable rental units. And again, it's not rent-controlled units. It's in cooperation with the developer. Again, if they're building 100 units, they say, okay, I'll set 5 aside that are going to be below market rate. As it relates to water, again, we're working with the governor and we're working with our friends in Northern California to make sure that we have a adequate water supply. But again, there are things regionally that we can do. Again, I spoke to desalination, water storage. Those are issues that we really need to embrace if we want to make sure that we have an adequate water supply to serve not only California, but the region of Southern California. But what we've done in Southern California, which people very rarely speak to, in the last 20 years, we have conserved more water, despite the population growth, than the rest of the state. So we've gotten the conservation part down very well in Southern California. So we're almost at our limits that we can't conserve anymore, but we have to look at new technology that will allow us to increase our water supply here.
Thank you. And one possibly for our federal representatives. We have so-called sanctuary cities across California. How can the state and our federal government representatives fight to protect the federal government from withholding money to our sanctuary cities throughout the state?
The first thing we've got to do is resist the effort to basically threaten our cities that if they don't do what the new administration wants them to do, that they're going to pull all the money back. So when you see a lot of discussion going on and basically confrontations and fighting, it's about issues, public policy issues. And so we've got to try and convince the new administration that this is not the way to deal with immigration. We need comprehensive immigration reform. Comprehensive immigration reform will take into consideration those people who have been in the country for a long period of time, who have been paying their taxes, et cetera, et cetera. It will take into consideration those people who are part of the criminal element and deport them and gangs, et cetera. It would take into consideration how you get in line in order to get your papers to become, a citizen. And so when you think about immigration, let's not simply think about one aspect of it. Let's think about what it means to have comprehensive immigration reform that really takes into consideration all of the issues related to immigration reform. For example, ladies and gentlemen, I have to tell you, if they deported everybody who's not a citizen, they'd have to close down Palm Springs for sure. Think about many of the jobs and services that we benefit from that are provided by people who want to be legal, they want to get through a system that works, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so let's think about it in a comprehensive way. I am going to resist taking money from so-called sanctuary cities because they don't fall in line with this new administration's thinking.
Thank you so much. Congressman Liu, a couple questions here came up on Wi-Fi and digital security, as you might imagine. Given your warnings about public Wi-Fi, is there work being done to bring broadband access to all areas of the district and make it more affordable for many families? Public Wi-Fi is their only internet access. And also, if I can combine it with this, when cities around the world are making digital equality with city Wi-Fi, public IT tools, how do we counter it with security and technology advancement?
Thanks for those questions. As you know, the current administration has talked about infrastructure, and that's actually an issue that Democrats have been talking about for a very long time. So I've been working with my colleagues as well as Republicans to try to get cyber and broadband included as part of infrastructure. We're in the 21st century. I believe it should be called infrastructure, and we need to get broadband out to rural Pennsylvania as well as rural California and every place in between. So that's something that we are working on, and hopefully if there is an infrastructure plan that Congress and the new administration can agree on, hopefully it will have broadband and other cyber components in there. I also think protection of our infrastructure digitally is really important, right? We've got ports and dams and other places that can be hacked, that have been hacked, and I think that should be part of any infrastructure proposal. So I'm working with other colleagues on coming up with an infrastructure proposal that includes sort of all of those elements. And then on the second question, we're just way behind in terms of keeping up with the hackers. And we might never be able to keep up with them, but my analogy is sort of, let's say you have a home, right? You don't want to keep it unlocked. It's probably not the smartest thing, or keep your windows open. So at least we can do that. And then you might add some additional security to make it so that your sort of normal burglar can't sort of get in. But if the Russians are going to land a special unit with 50 special forces folks, they're going to get into your house, right? So you can't really stop that. So we're in the process of just trying to lock the doors, close the windows, just make it harder for your average criminal, your average sort of criminal syndicate to try to hack you or your systems, stop ransomware. But we're never going to be able to reach that level for sort of a personal home or a even a state or local government to prevent being hacked if a foreign entity really, really want to do it. Maybe one day we'll get there, but we're not even close to that yet. So that's sort of my sense, that you just want to make sure your local government's police department isn't a victim of ransomware, for example. That we can do, and that's what we're going to work on.
I want to just mention this. I tell my husband all the time, there is no more privacy. I mean, and I give this blanket statement because we see hacking and interference in so many ways. I was on the floor of Congress in a debate, and the debate was one of the financial services issues. And so I was talking about benefit analysis, something that's used by those who don't like the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, and they come up with ways by which to keep them from being effective, to thwart their work, et cetera, et cetera. So this cost-benefit analysis that I was talking about, I connected it to some of those who attempt to thwart the SEC's effort to make sure it protect investors, and I brought in some talk about Russia and about the Kremlin. And so in the middle of my debate, RT, Russian television, hacked or did something, I don't know, I'm still trying to find out. I was blacked out, and Russian television was up for 10 minutes and blocked out the speech that I was doing. And I just happened to be talking about Russia and cost-benefit analysis and the SEC at that point in time. So if they can hack you on the floor of Congress, and I think that's what happened, I don't know, and we've asked C-SPAN, right? C-SPAN. We asked C-SPAN to explain it to us. Ted, I still haven't gotten a credible explanation yet. But if they can get you on the floor of Congress and interfere, then everything is fair game. All right. Thank you.
There you go.
I just want to address the question as it relates to broadband expansion. I authored a bill 3 years ago, the first, not only in California, in the nation, to now provide internet to public housing and urban areas, not in rural areas. Every public housing facility in the state of California that is built over 50 years ago is not wired for Wi-Fi or internet. So the importance of trying to find a job when you do not have the internet, it's hard. College applications, even doing homework. We have clearly seen a student with a computer is far different than an A student without a computer. So we authored the first bill in the nation to not only do public housing, but other urban areas that are still without the internet. So it's a priority with me. I chair Utilities and Commerce, so we want to make sure that we connect all of Californians in order, because when you talk about smart homes, if you don't have the internet, you can't access any of that new technology, so it's important.
Yeah, I know, and Jackie Bacharach with the COG came up during that last question. I mentioned also that the South Bay COG and the WIB, the Workforce Investment Bureau, are doing a feasibility study on getting broadband to cities in the South Bay. Did I describe that right? Good. And I know it's just about 10 o'clock, and we are probably out of time, but I'm going to squeeze in one more question. What are we doing on the federal or state level to provide relief to the costly mandates to local governments concerning stormwater quality? Lots of action on that subject, I take it. Thank you, Al.
Yes, I had the privilege of one of my first official meetings, meeting with Mayor Zuckerman and Councilwoman Smith on the challenges facing many of our cities in terms of the treatment and the costs of stormwater runoff. It's obviously a concern that, especially as, for example, laid out by the representatives of the city of Rolling Hills Estates, it far eclipses your annual budget in terms of the estimated costs of stormwater treatment. And so one of the things that I would like to do is to use my position as the chairman of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee. One of the privileges of chairing this committee is to be able to identify the priorities on what oversight should be taking place of any public entity in the state of California, whether it's a state agency or a city or a school district, or in this case, our state water boards. And so I am investigating and looking into making sure that that we can ensure that the costs of stormwater treatment, which, as I think we can all agree, we want to make sure that we protect our beautiful ocean and our coastline, but we also want to make sure that it's addressed in a reasonable way, one that does not overwhelm any of our local budgets. And so I will be focusing on that issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to squeeze in one more because the mayor asked me to, and I want to thank City of Torrance again for hosting us, and because the South Bay Association of Chambers really has championed this issue over the last decade or so, I thought it was important to bring up. How can we protect the LA Air Force Base from base realignment or the BRAC process?
So thank you for that question. Last term, I met with the Secretary of the Air Force, and I invited her to visit Los Angeles Air Force Base, and then she did. And so she had a chance to see the base and see the importance of the base, not just for our local economy, but also for the national security of the United States, because space is so important now. It helps all of our military services. It helps our intelligence agencies. And the Space and Missile Systems Center at LA Air Force Base is this monumentally important center for our national security. And most of what you see in space today is directly or indirectly related to that center, as well as the Aerospace Corporation, which is co-located right across the street. They have a better cafeteria, by the way, if you ever go there. GPS was invented there. So I think it'll make a really pretty good argument that this is a crown jewel, that if you move to the middle of New Mexico, these folks are not coming with you. And there's a saying in aerospace that to have a rocket scientist with 20 years experience, you need 20 years. So you can't just replicate this entire space complex in the middle of another state. So I think that argument carries the day, and I think it's going to continue to carry the day. It's something we're going to keep on making, and look forward to working with all of you to continue making that argument.
Thank you very much. Now let's please give a round of applause and thank all of our elected officials for being here. Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Congressman Ted Lieu, State Senator Stephen Bradford, Assemblymember Al Meritsucci, and Assemblymember Mike Gibson. Obviously, let's please thank you. And of course, again, I want to thank the Metropolitan Water District for providing our breakfast and fuel for the day. It's important for adults as well as students in the classrooms. And of course, thank you to the City of Torrance, the South Bay COG, and SBACC. And thank you for coming out and joining us today. It really is important to do this once a year and hopefully Torrance will have us back again. But look forward to seeing you next year, and let's continue this conversation throughout 2017 and really get something done in Sacramento and DC. Thank you all so much.